A pleasant good morning to everyone, and welcome to another chapter of Time of the End. He said unto Daniel, Go thy way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed until the time of the end. He said, Shut up the words and seal the book until the time of the end. And so this is A.K.A. Uncle Wayne with you on another chapter of Time of the End. And I've not been so well for some time, but nevertheless, this morning, today, we'll be doing part 2 of Daniel chapter 8. And so before we will do a bit of recap, and we know from verse 1 to about verse 10, Daniel sees a vision. The year is 553 BC. It's the third year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon. So Babylon, the head of gold, is still ruling. A follow-up actually to Daniel chapter 7, where he saw these 4 great beasts rise up out of the sea. And he saw the ram and the goat. And the ram came up, and it had 2 horns upon his head, and the second horn that came up became greater than the first horn. And as I've said before, a horn represents a ruler, and whenever you see that, you know it's about a ruler ruling over a people. And then Daniel saw the he-goat come from the west with one notable horn between its eye, a great horn. And it ran in showline anger to the ram. And the goat smote the ram and destroyed the ram and stamped upon him. And after that goat became great, the great horn was broken, and 4 divisions came, 4 horns arose. And we want to continue and read from verse 9 of Daniel chapter 8. And out of one of them came forth a little horn which waxed exceedingly great towards the south and towards the east and towards the pleasant land. Verse 10. And it waxed great even to the host of heaven, and it cast down some of the hosts and of the stars to the ground and stamped upon them. Daniel is saying out of one of these 4 divisions, and we know because I've mentioned it, that the ram was the Medes and Persians. Daniel is seeing where the he-goat, which was the Greeks, came and destroyed the ram. So, and out of that kingdom, the kingdom of Alexander the Great, out of one of them there was a little horn. Last week we spoke about Nero and Herod Agrippa II, who went in and committed an abomination in the temple of God, and what they did. But there was also 2 other persons that committed abomination. There was Pompey, the great general of Rome, but these 2 were from Rome. Both Nero and Pompey were from Rome. Pompey did destroy many of the children of Israel, went into the temple killing people, and even poked his head into the Holy of Holies. That took place in 63 BC. And that day after he conquered and subdued Jerusalem, he just packed up all his men and left. But I'm not going to go in all the details. But at the end of it all, Pompey lost his head. Pompey's head was cut off, and it was on display in Egypt. And so I'm not going to go into all the details. But there was another abomination even before that. And that has to do with Antiochus. Under the great die, the kingdom was divided into his 4 generals. Lysimachus, there was Seleucus, there was Ptolemy, and there was Antigonus. So 4 divisions, and the 2 main ones were the kingdom of the north, which was Seleucus, which became the Seleucid dynasty, and in the south, in Egypt, there was the Ptolemaic dynasty, and they ruled the longest of all the 4 of them, and they were known as the Diadochi. And Daniel is saying out of one of them came forth a little horn. So bear in mind that in Daniel chapter 7, Daniel saw a little horn rise up out of the 4th kingdom, which is Rome. And there were 7 heads and 10 horns, and the little horn came up and destroyed 3 that was before it. But that is out of the 4th kingdom. So we're looking at the 3rd kingdom, which is the Greek kingdom, the kingdom of Alexander the Great. Out of these 4 generals, there would rise up a little horn. So let us be mindful that this little horn is not the same little horn that Daniel spoke about in Daniel chapter 7. We've got to pay attention to the details to understand these things, because the word of God is precise and it is very clear. So we must pay attention to details. And he said this little horn would rise up and would wax great, and would even to the host of heaven, and it cast down some of the hosts and of the stars to the ground and stamped upon its feet. Epiphanes, meaning he held the title of the manifested presence of God in the flesh. So please pay attention to his very name that was given unto him. Antiochus Epiphanes, around 167 BC. And what he did, he went and he subdued Jerusalem, because he was in control, and Jerusalem rebelled against Antiochus. He came from Syria, the Seleucid dynasty. And he went down there and he destroyed many, and he killed by the thousand. He wanted to crush any form of Jewish religion and religious belief, and wherever he found that scroll, he would destroy it, and anybody found what that scroll was burnt. Not only that, he killed many of the priests. He refused to accept his teaching and his belief, because he was likened unto God in the presence in flesh. And he went into the temple of Jerusalem, killed many, even in the temple, went into the Holy of Holies, dismantled the altar of God, set up on the altar of God an image of his god Zeus and Olympus, and he sacrificed pig, swine's blood. And we know how the Jewish people hated swine and demanded that all Jews would sacrifice, and throughout the length and breadth of Judea he set up altars that they might worship his gods, Olympus and Zeus, and that swine's blood and swine's flesh must be sacrificed upon the altars in Jerusalem. And many of the Jews, because of the harsh punishment, obeyed, but there were those who had a zeal for the Father's house who refused, and so many died. And this man did the worst thing that anybody could have ever done to the Jewish people by sacrificing blood. He also stopped all form of circumcision and wanted to rid the nation of this Jewish identity and the God of Israel. He wanted to crush this God. And so Antiochus did all this evil in the presence of God. And so the word of God said he magnified himself and he became great, even to the host of heaven. And so I said before, a host represents an army. So he destroyed the army of Israel, even to the host, and cast down some of the hosts and of the stars to the ground. A star represents a sun. Remember the dream of Joseph when the 11 stars bow down to this one star. Star represents a sun. So he cast down the stars. Not only did he destroy the armies of Jerusalem, but also the sons of Jerusalem. So many of the people of Jerusalem were killed by him and stamped upon them. He magnified himself even to the Prince of Hosts, and by him the daily sacrifice was taken. Now let's pause there a minute. He magnified himself even to the host, Antiochus. If you look at his lineage, you would see people names like Laodice and Berenice, and it went down to Mark Antony, one of the great generals of Rome, and there was a mixing of the bloodline between the Seleucid dynasty, Antiochus, and the Romans, and they became noble people in Rome, and they stood and sat as client kings and princesses and princes in the room, within the Roman hierarchy. And they lived in a place that family through Antonia coming out of Mark Antony of Rome, that great general. They formed a dynasty and they lived in a place called Pontus. And I know from the time I mentioned the word Pontus, and that's why we have to be very careful with this word because it is 100% accurate. And so this family generally lived in a place called Pontus. And that is where we get the name Pontius Pilate, who stood against the Prince of Princes. Pontius, even that though it may have been given to him as a name, it represents where he came from. He came out of nobility, out of this lineage that stood as kings and princes and princesses and noblemen in the kingdom of Rome. So Daniel is seeing a transition from the Greek Empire into the Roman Empire and the dynasty. And Daniel sees all these things and has accounted for these things in the Word of God. And it speaks of the accuracy of the Word. So Pontius Pilate would have come from that place called Pontius. And Pontius, we know, part of Turkey. So he hails from that region, and that is where Pontius is. So hence we get the name Pontius Pilate. And so Daniel has called it correct. You just stay with me on these chapters of time of the end, and you'll hear great and marvelous things coming out of this word. And so he stood against the Prince of Hosts. The Prince of Hosts is Jesus Christ, and we know Pontius Pilate stood against him. And by him the daily sacrifice was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was destroyed. So the daily sacrifice was taken away first by Antiochus, then Pompey, and finally Nero and Herod Agrippa II, which was done in 66. And Nero in 63 decided he was a god and demanded worship, went into the temple, took the tithes and the offering and the gold that was in the temple and the zeal of the Father's house. Those that were eaten up by the zeal of the Father's house in 66 came and fought against Nero, and that war ended in 70. So from 63 to 70 there was chaos in the land. And by the way, let me pause here and tell you about this Antiochus who did all this evil. The children of Israel eventually rebelled against the wickedness that he has done in the land, and he went to go with an army to destroy the nation of Israel. So let there be light and let people pay attention to those that would rise up to destroy the children of God. And he was on his way to Jerusalem to crush the revolt and to destroy all the children of Israel. But he was struck down on his way with an evil spirit and was tormented, and the children of Israel destroyed his army, and he became as a madman. And these unclean spirits that took hold of him, he died in anger and his pain and in regret for the things that he has done. So this is one man in the history of mankind who lived on earth in the flesh, in hell. He was on earth, but he was in hell, and he saw the torment in hell because he was tormented day and night with these unclean spirits until it ravaged him and destroyed his life. There is so much. We'll have to do a part 3 of this thing, and probably later I'll try to get it done. But this has been A.K. Uncle Wayne on another chapter, Time of the End. And so we see the transition between the Greek Empire coming into the Roman Empire, and the place was made desolate. To make desolate is to empty by force, by violence. It's not a pilgrimage. This is 2026. It is not a normal year. It's a year of great change in the earth. It's a year when great evil will rise up in the earth. But watch and pray, because the return of Christ is imminent. God will watch over his people. Those who endure to the end shall be saved. Watch and pray, people, and put your trust in Jesus Christ. He's our only hope. Good day, and God bless you.